No matter what, when debating anime, people bring up many different points as to why a show is good and why it's not. You could have like animation, the story, the characters, the community, whatever. People will always find something to compare them to. Well, in today's video, my name is Berthrilled, and I'm going to be looking at the best parts of anime. I took like the major different like parts of anime, like community, like animation, and we're going to be taking a look at the best and worst parts of anime in my opinion. Now, like I obviously just said, this is my opinion, so if you don't agree, that's totally fine. And it might be a little confusing, but you'll understand once we get started. Let's get straight into it. So I think the worst thing about anime is genuinely the community. So many people in the anime community are very toxic because they do feel passionate about it, which I do get, but there's a way to be passionate about things without being an asshole, and I think that's pretty hard for the anime community. Obviously, I deal a lot with takes, and every time I talk about my takes, I try to be as respectful as possible, except for maybe with like the Elusive Samurai or Skate the Infinity, because I really do hate those shows. But even then, I still try. Like, I don't hate people that like those shows or anything like that, and I don't think they're bad people or anything like that. But a lot of times in the community, you can say something, like, for example, I did a JoJo's versus JJK comparison on TikTok, because that's a big series I have over there. And then whenever I did that, JoJo's won by a lot, and there were genuinely people getting mad that JoJo's didn't sweep the whole thing, which if you like are unbiased, it really doesn't. But people were really mad that JoJo's didn't sweep the entire thing, and I'm like, you're getting that mad over 2 or 3 points? Like, really? And it's obviously not just JoJo fans as well. And that's really more when you get into anime discourse, which maybe you don't. But there are other communities that are genuinely terrible that you don't even have to really interact with that much. And that's like JJK is an example of one. Because the JJK fandom, they just spoil everything. Like, they post so many spoilers about everything, and then they don't even know what happens. They're just posting the spoilers. They haven't read it. They don't understand what's going on at all. Yet, still they post the spoilers. And then my last example of bad communities would be like My Hero. I mean, they are literally the poster boy of a bad community, so I don't even need to speak much about that. But yeah, I think the community is probably the worst part about watching anime. Next, we have animation. Now, some people may disagree with this, because I know some people, like, there's some friends that I have that just don't want to watch anything old because the animation is so bad. Personally, the animation's not that important to me. I think as long as you have a good story, the animation doesn't really matter. Like, for example, Yu Yu Hakusho is one of my favorite anime ever, and is the animation stellar? No, it came out in like 1992, bro. Like, it's not gonna be stellar animation, but the story is phenomenal, and a lot of the other stuff about it is phenomenal that, like, I don't really care. So for me, the animation is really low. I get some people do care about the animation, but honestly, I don't. I think as long as the story's good, then that's fine, because at the end of the day, it is just drawings, so I don't think the animation needs to be perfect all the time. To me, it doesn't really matter, so that's why I have animation so low. Also, a lot of my favorite anime do come from like the 90s, so clearly animation doesn't matter to me. But next up, we have depth. Now, I don't think depth is really that important. I do think a lot of people latch onto it. Now, obviously, for all of these except probably the community is the only one that really doesn't matter, in my opinion. But the rest of these, having good, all of them combined is probably what makes like the best anime, right? But like depth, you don't need depth to be a good show. For example, Dragon Ball or like Solo Leveling, neither of those shows have a lot of depth at all. I mean, Dragon Ball's only depth comes from Vegeta, to be honest, and then if you remove Vegeta, there's really no depth in the story at all. But that doesn't make it bad. It really doesn't. Like, just because something is simple doesn't make it a bad show, right? Like, it can still be good. That's why I have depth really low, because I don't really think it matters to me. Now, I do prefer a show with more depth, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Like, so I don't really think it's that important to me. And if you want to go, like, a good example is you have something like Monster or, like, even Fire Force. Like, I know Fire Force gets a lot of hate, but the depth in it is honestly insane. I mean, it literally connected to real life, like, in the anime. So, like, I think that depth is very, very there. And obviously something like Monster is insane as well. I think it is important. A lot of my top shows do have a lot of depth, but sometimes they don't as well. Sometimes they can be very simple. So it's not super important, but I think it does matter a little bit more than animation. Next, we have plot/story. I have the plot/story here because I'm going to be honest, the story doesn't always have to be the greatest. Now, this is literally number 4 here, so it's in the middle. We have 8 different categories that are ranked here. Also, if you're enjoying this video, leave a like, subscribe, help the video, or hype the video, please. It helps me out a lot, and I upload anime videos 3 times a week, so there's something here for you to enjoy. But anyway, let's continue with the plot and story. So, sometimes the story does a lot of heavy lifting. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's fine. For example, I think like Code Geass or Bleach are honestly carried by the stories. Yes, they have good characters and other things like that, but I think it's really the story that carries those. If you replace the story of Geass or Bleach with a mid story, I don't really think it does well, but there are shows that do well that do have a mid story, if we're being honest. And people are going to give hate for this. JoJo's is my second favorite anime ever, but there isn't a continuous story. The stories of each part are different, which I get people compare the parts individually, but it's still all one show. So you could argue there's not even really a plot or story to JoJo's, which I would say there's not, because every part is so different. Yet it's still very, very good. And even like one like Bungo Stray Dogs, for example, that's like one of my favorite anime, right? The plot and story is kind of different for every season. Like, until Fyodor gets introduced, the plot is so different. The plot is focused around, I can't remember the name, the Port Mafia, that's what it is. It's focused around the Port Mafia. Then when Dazai gets in, or not Dazai, when Fyodor gets introduced, it's like, okay, now this is the big bad. Now the story really gets started. Which I get a lot of shows are kind of like that. So that's why I'm saying I don't think the plot / story needs to be like the number one thing, but I do think obviously a good story is very important. Honestly, the only non-important one on here pretty much is the community. That just shouldn't affect how you feel about a show, but it does for some people. Next up though, we have pacing. I think the pacing is one of the more important things when it comes to anime, because you could have a mid story, and if it's paced great, then it's gonna feel great. For example, I think two of the extreme examples of pacing, you have One Piece, which has some of the worst pacing ever, versus Hunter x Hunter, which is arguably the best pacing, or the best paced anime of all time. Now, if you compare those and look at those, you'll see like One Piece is like, now personally I love One Piece, and I don't think the pacing is that bad, but I get why people get bored of it. The pacing at the beginning especially is really, really, really slow. So I get it. That's a show that like people are going to get bored of. And I think that's probably the most valid complaint you could have about One Piece, is being like the pacing is terrible, because it is. I'm not going to lie. But then like Hunter x Hunter, you will never hear anybody say Hunter x Hunter is paced bad, because it's not. They do everything at a very good pace. You know, nothing's too fast, nothing's too slow. And so I think pacing is very important, because Hunter x Hunter, don't get me wrong, I love the story, love the characters and all that, but if it had the pacing of One Piece, is it near a top 10 anime? No, it's not. Let's be honest. It's not close to top 10 if it has the bad pacing. So I think pacing is very important, because sometimes that leads shows to being way better. You also have things like Full Metal as well. Like, that's an amazingly paced show, and things like that, right? So that's why I think pacing is very important, because it can make you pretty bored. Next up, ahead of pacing, we're getting into the top 3 things now. For me, is peaks. Now, I think, you know, a lot of people would be like, oh, the peaks aren't that important. But if you think about it in a show, you're going to remember the hype moments. Like, for example, I put like the first Super Saiyan transformation on here. Everybody that's watched Dragon Ball remembers that. You're never going to forget that Super Saiyan transformation. You won't. Another one for me, and probably like my favorite peak, one of the best peaks in anime for me, is like when Rock Lee dropped the weights. I will forever remember that. I'll be on my deathbed and I'll probably still be thinking about the Rock Lee dropping his weights, because it is phenomenal, right? Like, you're always going to remember the top tier moment from every show you've watched. And now even like bad shows, now it's hard to think, because a lot of bad shows are normally because they don't have a lot of great peaks, right? It's normally just kind of mid all the way throughout, in my opinion. But yeah, even bad shows, you're going to remember the peak moments. Like, let's say Assassination Classroom. Now, that's not a bad show by any means, don't get me wrong, but it is kind of a forgettable show. So, for like Assassination Classroom, the ending, oh man, is that really memorable. The rest of the show, not so memorable. The ending, oh my god, super, super memorable. And that gets me into my next point with peaks, is a lot of times the endings are the peaks. For example, like Mob Psycho has a lot of peaks, but the biggest peak is by far the ending, like the Mob and Reagan, like that. It's so touching, it's so awesome. Full Metal, the peak is the ending. So I didn't want to include endings on the list, because the endings are meant to be peaks. So I think it just fits in here with the peaks category. Moving on to the second most important thing, we have emotion. I think emotion is super, super important, and probably the second most important thing in anime, because it's what you're walking away with, right? When you get done watching a show, you want to feel something. Like, that's the point of watching shows, in my opinion. You don't watch shows just to analyze and critique things, unless if it's your job. Like, you're watching shows to feel something. Like, that's the point. So the emotion has to be very important. It doesn't always have to be like sad emotion, or like, you know, that super in-depth feeling when you finish a great story. Sometimes the emotion could be, hey, that was really funny. Like GTO, for example. Now, GTO does have good moments that makes you feel like wholesome, but at the end of the day, you watch a lot of GTA and GTO and you're like, man, that was a really funny story. I'm glad I watched that. I had a lot of laughs. That was great. So emotion is just so important because it's what you walk away with. Big examples for me is Mob Psycho 100. I'm going to be honest, the story of Mob really isn't like the most fantastic story ever. But the emotion you get from Mob Psycho, it honestly is second to none. I really don't think anything compares to Mob's emotion. It is genuinely probably the most emotional anime ever. And then you have another one like Full Metal. It's up there. Full Metal is definitely top 5 most emotional anime. Let's be honest. It very, very emotional as well, and that's why people love Full Metal so much, because although I call Full Metal arguably a perfect anime, let's be honest, it's not perfect. But the emotion is so good that you can ignore some of the downsides to Full Metal, which there's not much, but you can't ignore some of the downsides because the emotion just overlaps it. Like, it is, I think most people might have emotion at number 1, but there's one more thing that I have a little bit higher. And for my number 1 spot on the best thing for an anime is characters, in my opinion. I think having someone to relate to or attach yourself to just makes the experience of what anime is, or really what TV is in general. Now, this isn't an anime, but I've had this discussion with friends before, and I think something like The Boys, for example, the reason I don't like it as much as other shows, now I do still like it, but the reason I don't like it as much is because there's not a character to attach yourself to. Like, they're all pieces of shit, right? And in anime, they're like that too, which are normally the anime I don't really like. If I can't really relate, or I don't even have to relate, if I can't attach myself to a character, it's going to be hard to enjoy it as much, because it's hard to feel emotionally affected in a show when you don't feel strongly towards the characters, if that makes sense. I have 2 examples here. Like, relatability wise, like Spike Spiegel, to me, most relatable character in anime for me, in my opinion. I relate to Spike a lot, so when I was watching Cowboy Bebop, I was like, this is literally me. Like, this is me. So when I watched that, I was like, man, I am just watching myself in a show. Now, there hasn't been anybody as relatable as Spike, but still, characters that are somewhat relatable, it's like, man, I feel that, I feel that. And then I have ones that, like, aren't relatable, but I attach myself to. Like, for example, in JoJo's, we have Polnareff. I'm not like Polnareff at all, I'll be honest, but he's such a likable guy that it's like, wherever Polnareff goes, I'm happy. I'm happy to be there. Like, even the episode, which I'm going to be honest, isn't really the greatest, where he fights the pedo dude who turns them into babies or whatever, like, I'm going to be honest, probably not the best episode, but Polnareff was in it, so I loved it. Anything with Polnareff in it, I'm going to love, right? And it's not just one character, like, because that's a little different. It's not like a favorite character thing. Like, we can go to One Piece. I love Kid, Zoro, Bart. Okay, I start need to say Eustace Kid, because saying I love Kid sounds weird, but anyway, let's move on. I like Eustace Kid, Zoro, Bardo, Frankie. Like, there's so many characters in One Piece that I like, that you can rely on the characters sometimes. And I think that's why the pacing to me in One Piece doesn't matter as much, because you got Zoro there for a lot of it, and I love Zoro, right? So I think that's a big thing for me, is characters, because there are going to be times realistically in every single story where maybe the story drops, maybe the pacing isn't there. There's going to be something that happens, because no story is perfect, but if you have good characters there surrounding that, it's not going to feel it at all. Like I said, that Attaboy episode with Polnareff, I'm going to be honest, objectively probably a bad episode, but to me, I loved it because Polnareff was there. Like, well, I shouldn't say loved it. It's not one of my favorite episodes by any means, but I liked it because Polnareff was there. Even the Anubis episode, I do think the Anubis episode is definitely better than the Attaboy episode, but still, they're definitely better episodes, but Polnareff was there. If you replace Polnareff with Avdol, I probably don't enjoy that episode. I'm going to be honest. There's no hate to Avdol, but yeah, to me, I think the characters are just genuinely the most important part of a story, because they're what get you through the story, if that makes sense. And they're what deliver the emotion. Like in Mob Psycho, for example, the most emotional show ever, the emotion is there because of Mob, because of Reagan, because of Dimple. If without those characters being there throughout the whole story, you don't get that emotion. Imagine if Dimple was introduced in season 3. Well, then everything he does in that season, it's not going to hit the same. But Dimple was there from the jump. He's there from like episode 4. So to me, characters do make an anime. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. What is the most important part in an anime for you? Because I know it's different for everybody, but to me, it's always been the characters. I always latch on to really cool and really meaningful characters. That's always been my thing. Obviously, I just went through it in this list. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I see some people that are very big story people. They're very big emotion people, which makes sense. A lot of people care about pacing. A lot of people care about animation. Let me know what you guys care about the most when it comes to anime. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, please. Help me out. I'll see y'all later.